Hi everyone and welcome back to our show. Today with me I have Ted Lango, Senior Vice President at Intradiem, as well as founder of WFM Labs. Join us as we speak about workforce automation, community building, and innovative planning methods. Join us as the two communities get together to discuss workforce management. Let's go, guys. Ted, welcome. Welcome to the WFM show. How are you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me today.
No, thank you for joining us. We have been speaking for a while, been trying to get this ready to go. Finally, we made it. It's not because we are on the same time zone, because you were traveling recently through Europe. But before any further ado, and I would love for our audience to get to know you a bit more and what we have been working on. So, can you share a bit on who Ted Lango is?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks again. I'm really pleased to be sharing some of this with you. As you said, I'm Ted Lango. I currently hold two jobs. I'm senior vice president at Intradiem. I'm also the founder of a community called WFM Labs that I'd love to share with you. I've spent probably about 2 decades actually on the contact center side, helping both small and large companies just improve their overall operations. I, over the years, got to be known sort of as a workforce management guy because I raised my hand early in my career when I was back at Comcast and we were out deploying a big instance of Variant, and I didn't think we were going about it quite the right way. Well, you open your mouth and raise your hand, and next thing you know,
It's your
you're
baby.
tasked. Yep, you're tasked with that. So I spent about 2 decades, really went deep in the area of workforce management. And about 2 years ago, I left MetLife and joined a company called Intradiem. Intradiem provides automation for workforce management. And I really started to think about WFM in a completely different light. And that's what led me to also form WFM Labs. We're a community of folks who share new ideas around looking at workforce management differently. Love to share some of those topics with you.
It's funny that you said like you started based on basically this journey started based on a task, like someone had to raise your hand. Like when you look back at it, and this is something like very common on the WFM space, which is no one really started by I really want to pursue a career here. Yours is a bit different because you kind of volunteered more than
Yep.
anything else. But I wanted to have a sense of like, did you expect the trajectory that it took when it was all starting?
No, no, not at all. I mean, it's I prior to working at Comcast, I worked for a group of competitive local exchange carriers, and I was operating the call centers there, really just over the overall organization. I had to learn WFM, but I had a WFM team there. But when I joined Comcast and joined, I was really focused on fixing whatever was broken. It could have been a quality program over here or knowledge management over there, or just trying to get things more efficient. When I saw the opportunity around how workforce management was being deployed, it was being deployed in a non-standard way, raised my hand, recognized that there were going to be problems, if we continued on in the way without creating some standards around how we deployed it. I had no idea as deep as you could go in this area around workforce management, but I loved it. I love the technology, I love the math behind it, and I really found a passion for just really understanding a very, very intricate profession that, as you say, no one really signs up for. They all kind of fall into it one way or another. I would have never have guessed that it would have led me to talking to you today, to forming this WFM Labs community and working for a software vendor, 20
Yeah.
years later that helps support contact centers through automation. So now, no idea. But I still love it. I mean, it's just a fascinating area. I also think it's an area that's just overdue for change.
Yeah.
I write about Erlang C and kind of the old ways of simple voice communications, and we're long past that and need to start looking at new methods. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm excited about as well.
Yeah, big I agree with you. Big change coming. I mean, not coming. They are already here. We just need to probably be more aware and adapt. So let me take a bit on WFM Labs. So The way I see it, and I've been saying this a lot, is WFM is a big space. There is loads of different communities, some of them very small, very niche, or very regional. And I think the more we can leverage all of us as a voice, the bigger it becomes. So Doug Casterton, one of our founders, sometimes says that there is no one, like everyone speaks about HR, everyone speaks about like different areas, but no one really speaks about WFM as like a group. Sometimes it's very well forgotten. And I wanted to like pick on your journey and founding WFM Labs to what really was the driver behind it, kind of like how was the first steps, because you have been already in the medium, so you knew the people, but like how was it like the beginning?
Yeah, I founded it as a part of joining Intradiem itself because I wanted to create a bridge where we had the voice of the workforce management able to kind of bring up ideas and really think about things differently. And so I basically had just three principles, in going to market with this. One is that we start to really think about employees first. Companies say it all the time. Oh, yes, the employee matters, but at the end of the day, it's usually the shareholder and the customer, and the employee comes third. So I really do think we need to kind of pivot around, start to think about employees first. I also see problems with capacity planning. All too often, I've been exposed to environments that just have capacity plans that are so tight that they end up breaking down. They're very fragile. And I also think that workforce management as a community, we run around like, chickens, people on fire all day long, reacting, having to pull levers once variance is introduced. So I really see a space for real time automation, being able to kind of rethink how we've traditionally planned everything ahead of time and really leverage variance and volatility to help us ebb and flow and come out with better results. So let's start up a community where we've got three basic principles. Can we go after some of this technology for better automation, for better planning? I introduce concepts around Monte Carlo simulation, different ways to think about planning. And most importantly, let's start to get the people, the employees, in this equation. Because when we think about processes and we say, hey, what does this mean to the employee? If we're taking care of them, the customers and the shareholders are usually taken care of as
Yeah,
well. I started it about a year and a half ago. I'll tell you, spinning up communities, as I'm sure you're aware, is not easy. It's we're about 1,000 members right now, but it's a trickle of a few members here, a few members there, and getting people engaged is one of the things that we
yeah,
really want to move on to next. Is how can we make the community more vibrant so everyone really wants to participate as
yeah.
opposed to just listening to Ted, theorize on, Monte Carlo simulation. So that's our big
I
next move is how do we get people really behind
yeah.
our different groups and engage so that we can all collectively move together.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the success is that engagement. I mean, as you were speaking, I was literally seeing myself on this side having the same challenges. But I think in the end of the day is all about. I think there are two critical factors. One is trust, in a sense that you can trust that if you have a question, you will find your answer. There is someone that can help you through. And I remember having a guest in the past that said that sometimes we are afraid of asking for help and we really don't understand why. It's just something that, but when we do and then we get an answer, like it's like opens the door, because like bringing perspective is sometimes very often quite important.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I would leave just to the audience in general is like, if we could, if we can share those perspectives, and if we find a place where we can be and the engagement is there, it will help us a lot to grow. It's like almost you find like a mentor or a coach that works with you, but in this case it's like just multiple people, multiple perspectives, and sometimes it's even faster to turn around on your questions. That's kind of like the way I see it. I don't know if
Yeah.
you want to add anything, but I think this is at least the way when I look at the WFM Labs or with the WFM or other communities that exist. It's like I hope all of us could drive the same level of engagement across
Yeah. And
this
that
profession.
that's, I mean, spot on. It's our next big move is we've got the community stood up. We have a lot of resources, but we also have a ton of talent within the community itself that we want to just make feel like, hey, you're free to ask the questions. To your point, I think there's a hesitancy for people just to ask a question. They don't perhaps want to look like, well, I don't know that answer. I'm putting myself out there and kind of breaking down that wall so people just feel like, hey, this is a community where I can ask whatever. There's no, wrong or stupid questions. It's just a matter of, hey, you're on a journey. None of us have all the answers, but collectively, between a pool of 1,000 of us, I bet you that some of us have, insights that could help, whoever it is. So that's our big next challenge. And
Yeah.
honestly, how we get the community to feel like, hey, they can engage, then the community just kind of takes on a new life. We're already seeing a bit of it, but still, I'd love to turn the engagement. It was, up from a volume of one, we're up to now a three, but I want to get that volume
Yeah.
turned all the way up.
Hope you guys can do it because, like I said, the way I see it, we all have to win. When we all succeed individually, collectively, it's always better for what workforce management could be. You spoke a bit about what Intradiem does. I'm familiar with it as well, but like not going into much detail, but like I wanted to speak more about from the perspective of the potential to automate. And I'm not saying this just on the sense of like we can go into workforce management because, as you said, loads of opportunity clearly are there. But I think automation in general is something that is very spoken, lots of buzzwords around it. But I wanted to simplify it a bit from like, how do you see, and when you look at workforce management, customer service in general, how do you see people going into accepting automation as well as the resistance path that exists in automation? So what, without going too much into, I don't want for you to speak for 2 hours because I think you could easily do it. Like, how do you see those two worlds collide between the need of it and the resistance of it, and how do you see automation playing a bigger role in
Yeah.
this picture?
Yeah, the simple way, and I love to bring up some gentlemen from history in this, is to think about what we do ahead of time versus what we do in the
Mm.
moment. And I say ahead of time is your plan, and what you're doing in the moment, we'll just say is planning. Dwight Eisenhower, Winston Churchill, and there was a gentleman by the name of Helmut Karl Bernard von Moltke. He was a field general in the Prussian army, and he originally said, no plan of operations extends with certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy's main strength. That's way too many words. So it was shortened by all of us to really say, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And Winston Churchill and Dwight Eisenhower took those same quotes, said, plans are of little importance, but planning is everything. And at the end of the day, while these are field generals leading people into the battle of war, there's this notion of we can do a certain amount of work ahead of time to plan, but really it's when the rubber meets the road and we're in the moment, it's what we're doing to pivot and adjust in real time because variability is inevitable. And so I think of automation as, hey, we do a lot of stuff in workforce management ahead of time, all with good intention. We plan the training, we plan the coaching, we plan the breaks, the lunches. The entire workforce management framework has this really heavy skew, I'll say, toward energy to plan. But then at the end of the day, we've all experienced it. It's 9 o'clock and we look like we've got a great plan, but by 11 o'clock, we now have calls coming in that we weren't expecting. We have people who weren't showing up that we were expecting, and we're having to pivot and react. And that's where I think automation can play the strongest role is rethinking of how we can leverage automation to really deliver activities throughout the day without spending so much time just trying to get the whole day correct. You need a good plan, but if you can use automation to basically coach, train, lunch breaks on demand based on how the day is playing out, you've got so much more resilience in your plan as a whole. And it's just as these gentlemen say, plans, I don't think plans are worthless. We all need a good plan, but plans are of
Mhm.
little importance. It's the what we're doing all throughout the day. And all of us know that we've got small workforce management teams. We just can't react quick enough to pulling, 5 people out of this queue and moving them over to here, or getting some people, out of this queue and into a coaching session. We just can't react quick enough because by the time we've gone and made those changes, another wave has come in and now we need people back on the phone. That's to me where automation shines, is the ability to deliver these activities
Mhm.
in real time and leverage variation and volatility as a friend, not a foe. So that's where I
Yeah.
think automation lives most resilient with the greatest benefit. The resistance to it, couple fold. Some people say, well, if I automate that, what am I going to do? And at the end of the day, I've automated activities where my real time folks, they had plenty of other work to do.
Yeah.
We got them deeper into optimizing the schedules, or basically going deeper into forecasting. So there's some fear, I think, of automation in taking jobs away.
Yeah.
The other aspect of it is it's a complicated equation. I'm saying this very easily with words, but putting automation into real time environments to make decisioning around how we can adjust staff in real time, it's a fairly big lift. There's a lot to think through. So I think part of it is maybe a little resistance to kind of, hey, if I automate everything, where's my job? I think another big piece of it isn't as much resistance to the concept as it is limited resources, limited budget. There's 100 other projects. How do we get priority to ensure that this is really going to be the type of thing we want to bet on?
Yeah. And if you allow me, I think you made a good point, and I don't recall. So we were together at SWPP earlier in the year, and I remember speaking with a few folks there around automation, what they were doing, and there was someone, I can't recall the name, that I wanted to credit for, but which is someone mentioned to me about the fact that they were embracing certain levels of automation into the WFM world. And what they were seeing is that the profile of those people were changing, but changing to a point that they could leverage their skill set, meaning that now they had people that are not only monitoring queues, but they were also monitoring certain bots that were doing certain tasks. And that kind of opens doors to different ways of looking at the job. Because, yes, can they do like low automations that are just plugs and plays? Yes. For the bigger ones, can they monitor those? And like you get to a point that, let's say, your workforce becomes, and conceptually I don't think it was the example, 20% is automated, there are bots running, okay, but someone needs to control, making sure they are doing the right things. Is that as different from kind of a real-time manager that is looking at queues and moving
It,
changes?
it,
Probably
to me, it's the same thing.
it's
You're
the
just
same, it's just a different
elevating
workforce.
skill sets. And I just had conversations. I'm doing
Exactly.
research on why people change skills as much as they do, and one of the side conversations to that discussion around why is, hey, and it's a wasteful activity for my RTA to be doing, sitting there and clicking boxes to rechange skills and do things
Yeah.
on reallocating resources should be something. And they basically are saying, like, why isn't this automated? Why do so? At the end, it just opens career paths for people. The more I introduced automation in my previous job, the more it enabled my folks to go on and do bigger and better
Mhm.
things. So very much.
I think it's a very common path, and I hope we'll see it more. I think it will definitely, will see it more. But let's see how that path turns out in the next couple of months. I don't think it will take years, to be honest with you. I think will be months. On another spectrum of this side, so we spoke about automation, we spoke about WFM. I wanted to touch from a different angle, which leverages a bit automation. So we are also seeing a big disruption on the service side, meaning when we look at contact centers and on the different service providers, the way we engage with customers is changing. This is kind of like what you allude to on the beginning on, do we have like a voice mainly contact center? Probably not anymore. Like it's changing a lot, and those new channels and new digital channels are bringing their own sets of automation that forces WFM professionals to act differently, to learn differently. Even though we plan to touch on Erlang C, most likely will become obsolete one day, to the point that, yeah, it fixes 20% of your problem. Do you want to keep it, or should we find another way to do it? So how do you see automation on that spectrum? Like how do you see that coming, and how do you see WFM being prepared or not for it?
Yeah, I don't think we are prepared for it. I
I
think it's
agree.
already here. I think we're behind. To the degree to which we can start to integrate more sophisticated algorithms to look at alternate channels and be able to pivot work and people, I think we're behind already. I do think Erlang C is, I mean, it's a, you know, Erlang C and Erlang A had their time, but in the idea of simple voice only communication channels, and that theory is really, for me, past. And it isn't a complete new reinvention, but it's really acknowledging the variance and volatility, but also the alternate channels and starting to look at things holistically. Voice is always going to be the most time sensitive channel. So if you start at voice and now you look at chat, which is time sensitive as well, but you then look at email and look at social and look at other channels, that the time sensitivity gets less and less. There's ways that we can think about the voice and the chat is sort of the inner circle of what we need to care for. The other work can live around it. So now it becomes a matter of shifting the work and or the resources as that variance and volatility comes into play. I'm thinking we really need new ways to think about your net line, and instead of just planning voice and your net staff to zero, hey, there's this much voice traffic, let's staff 50 people, at 10 o'clock to handle this much voice traffic. Let's start to look at the alternate channels, the chats, the emails, whatever channels you have, and start to build that into our actual line forecast requirements. And that's where I think automation, can be king at looking at the less time sensitive work, looking at the real time Q healths, and be able to move people and work dynamically as the day is unfolding. So I think we're behind. I mean, I think the work is already set up that way. I just don't think our traditional tools and technology and our processes have looked at it in a new light where we can think of the workload in total and leverage this technology to really move supply and demand much more dynamically.
And I think finding that balance that you are saying, that dynamic between supply and demand, it's the paradigm that we all live in regardless. When we look at the spec, whatever you want to look at it, it's always what we are trying to balance: the plans, the making sure that we have the right skill sets or the right people, multiple ways of saying the same thing in the end of the day. And I think that will be interesting how that unfolds into the future, especially because there will be more AI tools, there will be more like things that will come in and go, and I think we should be prepared
Yeah,
for it.
a great example for me has always been, hey, we've always
I
planned
was going to ask you for an
absence.
example.
Well, we've always planned absence as part of our overhead when we go and we're just looking voice only. We sit there and say, all right, well, we're actually going to inflate our staff line by 6% or 8% or whatever your Monday absence is. Well, I just wrote a paper on this, and it was termed around a new Erlang equation. I called it Erlang O, and the O is for overhead. Let's start thinking about our overhead more holistically. Instead of just the day of absences, let's think of how much overhead do you really have in your plan around training, coaching, alternate work activity, and plan holistically to that number itself. You end up with a much more resilient plan than trying to pre plan all the training and coaching, throw it all in one bucket. And then at the end of the day, that now becomes your new staffing line. And then met with automation, we can now sit there and move the people cross channels based on the health of the most time sensitive cues. So it's not a foreign concept to us. We all know we've used our
Yeah.
software to sit there and say 7% I'm going to bake in because I know that's my average call out rate on a Monday. Well, instead of baking in 7%, let's look at variability, volatility, and all that overhead holistically and just bake that into our plan. That's a whole new way of looking at our staff line. And at the end of the day, you then basically reallocate the work and the people as variability and volatility flow. It's not a terrible stretch from Erlang C,
Yeah.
but it's not as rigid as that is,
Yeah.
where we're trying to get right down to a pinpoint of exactly 55 people to handle the voice
Mm.
calls, at 10:30.
I really like that the way you brought something that is very present to everyone's, to kind of bring a different example, just extrapolate a bit more. So when we think about and could go back to automation plus this new wave of channels, I think one of the biggest, when I think about KPIs or what is the biggest difference or the fundamental difference that we are seeing, there is one that we always try to crack. It's not easy. I see some people do it, which is concurrency becomes a bigger topic than what it is before. And it's the fact that even though we could perceive and say that a chat or any kind of social media interaction or a message, those are live channels, those are not necessarily live. Those are kind of like a different type of asynchronous channels that we tend to treat as live just because of commonalities, what we perceive as a live interaction. And I think those concepts are definitely what is going to break the most, which will force us to adapt and rethink how we approach. And the other part is the tech stack. So most of the technologies, if they are not prepared for it, they will force you into that specific path. Like, is it a live channel or is it like a back office task?
Right.
That's kind of like how everything is formatted. And I think that journey we are in now is not only for the professionals to learn it, but also there is loads of work on the tech stack to be prepared for it, which I think it's getting much better. There are a few things I've been seeing across multiple folks in the space that I think it's going on the right direction. But still, it's like a journey. It's a process that is not easy. But I really, the way I see it when I look at this example is like the one that scares me a bit is like seeing how fast is becoming a reality versus how, like you said, we are behind. We need to start walking fast because we are still crawling.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's not an easy solution, and
No.
I stress there is no one size fits all because to your point around concurrency and how many channels and how much work is distributed across those channels, you really got to start there and really start to look at the time sensitivity of each channel. I saw years ago when chat first started to appear, there was a lot of discussions around concurrency and how we could pivot people between, four concurrent chats over here and then plop in a voice call, and at the end of the day that just didn't work. There are models, depending on your distribution of work, that will allow you to sit there and solve it and figure out how to best optimize in real time. But at the end, you've got to start with, for me, an aggregation of the work as a whole and then slice it up by the sensitivity of the time around your SLAs. People are not good at flipping between left and right all day long. So you have to figure out your base scale of, these folks are in chat. They're in chat all day long and they can handle X amount of chats and we can model that. At the end, though, you've got an aggregate of all this work and have to be able to model, all right, now how do I work with the variance and volatility to maybe shift the top 10%, when the needs are there. So to kind of bring it back to the overhead conversation, I think you really have to just start with your plan and look at supply and demand in a way where you can say, in aggregate, let's not just look at workload, but let's look at some of the other things like the off phone productive activities of coaching and training. Coaching and training themselves are something that agents, and I talk about agent first, they always end up being sacrificed for service level somewhere down the line. So thinking about this in a new way means committing to capacity plans that really stick to whether it's 2%, 3% coaching or 3% training. Get that all baked into your plan. Get your alternative channel baked into your plan. Now you can start to look at things holistically and slice it by time dimension and model things out in what I believe is a
Yeah.
more resilient way.
One of the ways I personally like to look at these challenges, like across the WFM, but when you break out plans, is it's a very common in finance, not very common in workforce management. So when you look at visualizations, a simple waterfall that breaks down either capacity on the different components, and you see exactly where you're losing. It's something that is very not common to see. Like most people trying to use 5 graphics, bars, charts, like whatever it is, but they lose the simple ability of telling a story in one single view, which you can start with. Okay, this is whatever my performance was. You decompose, like my plan was I achieved X, and you look at the mix. Okay, I lose X because of, for instance, volume mix. I just was planning to get more phone, I got more emails, or I got more chat, and that volume mix has a combination impact between HT shrinkage that when you put all together, you get to a specific impact that
Yep.
at your capacity. This is one that and this is more like maybe to everyone that is thinking about revamping reporting and how to share with stakeholders to make decisions. This is the single most important thing I learned was, if you show it in a very simple terms, waterfalls work quite well across most executives, is just showing the weight that thing has tells a massive difference, more than
Yep.
you convincing that, okay, my forecast accuracy was 85%, yeah, great, or 99%, yeah, great, but like how does that like go into like the business overall? And I think that's a big part on the story. And to your point, is like there is a lot to evolve, and I think that if there is decisions that can be made that are more impactful to employees, to the customers, and to the wider benefit of the company, that's the way I would look at things, is like how do we leverage that strong decision making, leverage data, integrations, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I haven't seen it in workforce management, but I'm very familiar because partnered with finance in building our budgets, and waterfall is where it landed all the time. I mean, that's what
Yeah,
was rolled up to the agent. We did use it actually to demonstrate, hey, these were the dollars we were going to need for this particular call group because we used a traditional finance waterfall.
yeah,
But you could definitely take that model and drill down to, let's make waterfalls that are WFM specific, just as you mentioned. I've never seen that done, but that's a great
yeah,
idea that for those who aren't familiar with waterfall reporting, it's a little tricky when you first try to, plop it into an Excel, but
yeah,
once you've got the template for it, it's super easy. And to your
yeah,
point, executives understand it because it's what they work with
yeah,
finance to do their budget planning or to review, results after a quarter or a month or that type
yeah.
of. That's a great
The
idea. I think.
the one just to try to put the picture. So the one that I've been using it for a while, one that I always think it works quite well is, let's say you start with, okay, I have 100 people that I schedule for a given day, but in reality I only got 82. Okay, so how do I break it? And then you get, like, I lost like five to shrinkage in terms of productivity. I lost three because they were absent. I lost whatever X on activities. And when you start seeing those down, those tell a very visual story about like
Yep.
why something happened. And you
Yep.
can play this with capacity, with all the different effects. The more data you have, the better stories you can tell in the end of the day. Ted, so we're kind of getting to the end, but I don't want to let you go before asking for what would be your advice to anyone now starting in workforce management, from kind of like a more junior people that are getting, just fall into workforce management. They are desperate for help. I think there is a clear recommendation I would give in advance, which is you can go to WFM, you can go to WFM Labs or others. Seek a community. I think you will always be better if you get peers that understand your pain. But I wanted to hear from you, like, what advice would you give to someone starting now?
Yeah, I think the community aspect of it is important and not being shy about asking questions. There's a lot of people who've been doing this for a lot of years who are more than willing to roll up their sleeves and give you pointers and guidance and refer you to material. So, community engagement's one thing. I also look at, depending on where you are, and I guess if you've been in this for years and years or you're brand new, kind of understanding a framework of where your organization sits relative to others is always helpful in communicating, hey, we do this and we do this and we do this well, but there's new ways. And so
Yeah.
one of the resources I always point people back to is we developed in WFM Labs, and it's an open source resource, a maturity model where you can answer some basic questions and sort of say, where do I live on the path? Are we still Excel and we're like
Mhm.
level one? Or, yeah, we've got the WFM software and we've got the foundational stuff, but we don't have a standard operating process. Or, hey, we really want to move on to a level three or a level four and get more sophisticated around, automation or more resilient financial and capacity planning. Understanding the maturity of your model allows you to now start to set out a path of where you want to go. So even if you're new to it or you've been doing this for 20 years, it's good to, have a vision of like, where do you want to take things? But, it just allows you to lay out plans for the future and evolve, because as I said, most of us are behind. We need to get out of some of these old legacy practices, but finding your way through the forest, I mean, can be difficult. So I just recommend the maturity model assessment from our community to folks. And as you mentioned already, lean on other people. Don't be shy to ask questions, reach
Mhm.
out to me personally, reach out to you. Most of us are more than willing to lend an ear to whatever, problem people
Yeah.
are trying to solve and point you in the right direction.
And I will just embrace, because it's a great resource that you just recommended. I remember still when you kind of released that, was, I think, loads of people talked about that, and I even shared within my teams and people. I think it's a very valid one. Ted, thank you so much for the insights. I think I would love to bring you back one day. I think would be interesting to explore a few other topics, but always good to have you. Thank you so much for joining our
No,
show.
Thank you. I appreciate being on your show and look forward to talking to you again.